Hi, it's Victor Burton from the Centre for Optimism, and this is our Optimism Cafe today. India and Australia, opportunity and optimism, and we have fantastic people on the panel. We have fantastic people who are attendees, and I'm full of joy and optimism, and this is going to be a great conversation. So it's a g'day to AK in Chennai.
Hi, good to be here, Victor.
Hi, Robert Masters in Melbourne.
Hello, Victor and everyone else.
Steve Manallack in Melbourne as well.
Yeah, great to see you, Victor.
Pratibha in Delhi.
I'm going to do my traditional namaskar, Victor, to all of you.
All of us will do the same. And Steve in Brisbane.
Hi, Victor. Hi, everyone all over the world.
Well, look, it's a fantastic group of people. And I can see also in the attendees, there's a lot of people with a great deal of experience in India. AK is the former Senior Trade Commissioner, so he is full bottle on business and trade and what it is to be an Aussie in India and an Indian in Australia. Rob Masters, the Chairman of the Centre for Optimism, is Australia's lead in crisis communications, a veteran Canberra journalist of all things, and just as well, just so networked into the connections between Australia and India. Steve, just incessant, the greatest blogger and promoter of opportunities in Australia and India. My friend Pratibha, who reminds me that I've now known her 25 years, the leading dancer of India, the founder of the Delhi International Arts Festival, and an expert in every facet, not only of Indian cultural life, but global cultural life. And Stephen Berkeley, who is just come back from 13 years working in the Global Hospital on Mount Abu, working in both Western medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. So the first thing we always do in these optimism cafes is to ask what makes you optimistic. So Pratibha, what makes you optimistic?
Thank you, Victor, for having me here, and hello to all of you all over the world. The reason I started with Namaste is we've seen all our global leaders doing Namaste during pandemic, when you couldn't touch each other and couldn't say hello to each other, couldn't shake hands, you did Namaste. And this is something that we always did in India. What makes me optimistic? Victor, for me, optimism is a way of life, because I do believe that life has its ups and downs. And, you know, your optimism makes you face your adversities and adversaries with a sense of, you know, purpose and equanimity. And well, I'm optimistic always that the next day will be better than this one, and that the next person I meet would be a better human being than the last that I met. So I look forward to life with a sense of wonderment. And then that's what I keep telling everybody, that you have to have a sense of wonderment, because the moment you lose that, you lose a lot of beautiful things that you can see in the world and experience it. So I'm optimistic that, well, in these times, these are hard times, and all of us are in our, you know, lockdown lives. And I think that right now, too, I'm optimistic that this gives us an opportunity to look at ourselves internally, to understand ourselves, because we all, you know, we're in a bubble. Speaking for myself and for my fraternity, we were jumping from stage to stage, traveling all the time, performing all the time, and we never really had time for ourselves to internalize the process, to understand where we came from, to understand our own thoughts, our ideas, our creativity, to allow it time to, you know, to bloom, allow time to fruition, so that there's a completeness in the process. We didn't have time for all that, and I think this has given us time. And for me, for the last 4 months, I know there was a lot of agitation and nervousness in my fraternity, because a lot of performances got cancelled, our travel engagements got cancelled, and you know, people generally thought that this put a stop to their livelihood. But in our Vedanta, in our science of life that we follow, We are told that life is not merely, working, consuming, and living off the frills that your profession gives you. Life is about understanding yourself, like I said, internalizing the process, having meaningful relationships, having deep relationships, and understanding what the other people are about. So I think finally we've stepped back and you started relating to people and relating to things in the manner in which we have to. So, and this has given us that pause button, the pause time to understand ourselves and the world around us. So I'm optimistic that we'll come out better as individuals, and so we will come out as better human beings, therefore contributing to a better community, a better society, and finally a better nation. And I hope that our the leadership all over the world understands this and utilizes this time to make our world a better place to live in. Thank you.
Just brilliant, Pratibha. And of course, we've been working on the Better Normal project, which Coca-Cola picked up this week. So that Better Normal just nails it. Now, from the other side of India, AK, what makes you optimistic?
Well, Victor, I think to me, optimism is a state of mind. For the same situation, one could look at it very, very optimistically and also very, very pessimistically. And I think a positive, healthy, creative mind is always optimistic because it can think, it can create ways of being optimistic, being happy. And also, I would even extend it to the fact that to be a good leader, you've got to be optimistic. Otherwise, you can't lead anyone unless you're an optimist. And it's easy to be a pessimist. So you need a bit of courage to be an optimist, along with your creativity and healthy mind. As for me, I think I'm a born optimist. I think probably Pratibha will agree with me. Anyone of my vintage, born in India in the 60s, 70s, what we've seen then, like just to even get a cooking gas connection for your house, one had to wait for decades. I'm not exaggerating it. To get a telephone connection, perhaps 8 years or 10 years. To get a two-wheeler or a car, Hi, Commissioner, welcome.
Thank you, and I apologise, but I'm pessimistic that online engagements, as I was just having, ever finish on time. So apologies. Other than that, I'm very optimistic.
Barry, you're very welcome. We're just asking each of the panelists what makes them optimistic. Pratibha has shared a beautiful philosophical nature. AK has told us he's a born optimist. And Steve, tell us what makes you optimistic.
Well, thanks, Victor. I think I was always optimistic in a loose way, but I saw the power, the real power of it, in the township of Marysville after the bushfires of 2009. For those who don't know, the town was completely wiped out, a beautiful town. 37 people were killed. This place was a ruin. And about a year after the fires, with the approval of the local psychologists, I conducted a program voluntarily of what I call meditations for recovery. Meditations for recovery. But what I actually learned out of that experience was the people who thrived after the fires, after the disaster, were the ones who had an optimistic mindset. So I saw there the power of optimism is that it underpins our resilience, our ability to bounce back. And that for me was a life-changing lesson.
Yeah, in fact, Jane Burns, who headed the Young and Well CRC, said that people talk about resilience, but the thing that makes it happen when everything looks impossible is optimism. And of course, you can't be resilient unless you believe there's a better world to come.
Yeah.
So, Steve, we've got Steve and Stephen. So, Stephen, what makes you optimistic?
What I love about conversations like this is it's the stories of others that unearth your own stories. And whereas I started with a particular idea about optimism, but hearing your stories that you've shared so far has released a few of my own. And having worked in healthcare for the last 3 decades, I've seen hundreds of examples of patients who have overcome amazing adversities, and some who haven't, but in the process, the grace in which they've handled their disease or the situation that they're particularly in. So I really, for me, optimism is seeing the hidden potential that may exist within an individual, within an organization, within a community, and helping them to exercise that hidden potential and bring it out. So that's what I see optimism as.
And you nail it again. You know that the American military, Harvard and Boston, produced a major study last year where they said that the trait that most signals that someone will live to beyond 85 and healthy is not genetics or geography, but optimism. So you absolutely nail it, Stephen. And I know you did that when you were working in the hospital as well, just lifting people. Well, Barry, welcome. Barry is an old friend. Those who know Australian politics know he became Premier of New South Wales, and he was a wonderful Premier, but always passionate about the Australia-Indian relationship. So I think your dream job, Barry, has to be High Commissioner or Ambassador to India. And although you're there in a sort of a lockdown. So Barry, you've always been an optimist, but share with us what makes you optimistic.
Well, I'm not conscious of always being an optimist, but remember, Victor, that I sat through 16 years in opposition, 4 elections where my party was beaten, and still waited for that final one, which we won and happily has lasted. So there must have been some optimism amongst me. Look, what makes me optimistic, I think, if reflecting on it since the invitation, is that I think one of the great attributes of Australia, one of the great attributes of India, are the education services on offer. And, when you think about our history, and I'm a bit of a buff, and you think about the history of the world, most things that have afflicted us globally over the centuries have been resolved by people coming forward at the moment. And, I'm, first person in my family to go to university. Not that my record shows that necessarily, but it was a great time. But, I know stories here where families have told me that they would rather go without food to ensure their children get the best possible education. And I know from my engagement with India over more than a decade that Indians who studied Australian universities, Australian university students who come to India and study, have gone back to their respective countries. Happily, many of the Indians have come to Australia and started businesses in a whole variety of fields that have added to our society. So I think that, education are the keys to the kingdom. I think that, properly played, properly encouraged, that provides me with optimism about the future, not just of the India-Australia relationship, but of each of the countries in the globe in which we live.
Well, each of the panelists is someone who'll support you in your work. Pratibha hasn't met you yet, but Pratibha is the founder of the Delhi International Arts Festival. I think you did meet on one occasion, didn't you, Pratibha?
I think in 2011 or 12, you did visit India as the Premier of the New South Wales, what do you call it, state.
Yep.
You came to inaugurate an exhibition of Australian Aboriginal art, and Peter Vergis was the High Commissioner at that time. So that was when we met.
I do remember that exhibition. I do remember that exhibition, yes. Yeah.
And of course, Barry, Steve is absolutely passionate about the relationship, writing, sharing on social media every day. AK was the Senior Trade Commissioner. And Stephen has just returned from working 13 years on Mount Abu in the global hospital there. So we've got a wealth of talent, but we know you've got a limited time. And so the next question we really wanted to ask you is, you've been in India for 6 months. It's such a rich, fantastic society. What makes you optimistic, and what do you see as the opportunities for increasing the Australia-India relationship right across the board, from business to culture?
Well, I think firstly, I start with shared values. I think both countries have shared values. I think secondly, the the fact that our diaspora in Australia is close to 700,000. So, you know, as I tell Indians here, 1 in 50 Australians are either Indian or of Indian origin, which is quite significant. And I think that helps with Indian and Australian literacy on both sides of the Indian Ocean. I think the fact that, and this is not a political question, but the fact that we have a Prime Minister, a Foreign Minister and a Trade Minister who are clearly deeply committed to the Australia-India relationship can only be a good thing, because there's no doubt, if I look back over the past decade or so, that with our fluid federal parliamentary system, that we've lacked that constancy that's required in any relationship, personal, business or intergovernmental, and that can help. And you know, I sat through last month's or June's virtual leadership summit thinking that it would be a bit flat because it's done over this sort of technology, and the relationship between Prime Ministers Modi and Morrison was very strong, even though firstly it's the longest they've ever had a discussion. Their 3 previous discussions have been, as they say, on the sidelines of other summits, but only for 15 or 20 minutes. And the connection between the two of them was very strong. And I think that helped deliver a range of agreements that mean that I can be optimistic. So India has rightful aspirations to grow its economy. It's announced during this crisis a large number of reforms to some of those obstacles that trade commissions in the past had to battle with, but obstacles that are being cleared, or at least have been announced, policies have been announced to clear them, that will open up opportunities for Australian businesses and farmers and others, including across all sectors, to engage more with India. And I think that's a principal positive. And so I think you know, it's now or never in a sense, and I'm convinced that it's now. You know, the relationship is in good form. We're trading $30 billion a year. The Indians are concerned that we're getting the bulk of that. The defence relationship has been the star of the team. You know, the number of engagements has quadrupled over the last 6 years. So at all levels, now seems to be the time to make that extra push. And I think finally, what makes me comfortable about India is that, like many countries during this current crisis, which has clearly set back all of our economies, including international trade, India's looked outwards, not inwards. India, you know, despite its population of 1.34 billion, despite a late arrival of COVID here, but nevertheless its arrival, it has been assisting neighbouring countries with their COVID issues. It's been providing pharmaceuticals and PET to 150 countries around the world, including Australia, to which it provided paracetamol and the cloth to make all that protective equipment that we're using in our hospitals. So it is sought to engage the world more often during this crisis, as we've seen some other countries retreat and practice isolationism.
I think spot on, Barry. But optimism is the shared currency. Scott Morrison has always said he's a natural optimist, and Prime Minister Modi is a passionate optimist. And as Pratibha knows, he's a yogi. He meditates regularly, all of which underpins optimism. And I'll have to share one funny story, Barry. He loves Australia. And when he was in Australia for the G20 summit, he winked at me and said, "Pratibha will kill me if we don't get a selfie together."
Really?
So I got my selfie with Prime Minister Modi as a result of Pratibha. So panelists,
wow.
what questions would you ask of Barry, and what should he focus on? Mate, just while you're thinking about it, David Spence, who's a good friend of mine from Sydney, picking up your education comment, Barry, he says, Australia could and should attract the best and brightest from India. What skills do you think Australia should focus on in attracting more Indian migrants and settlers?
Well, I think you know, clearly India has a lock hold on the IT sector. You know, this is a young country. It's a young tech-savvy country. It's a country where, and I looked this up again overnight because I never quite believe it, where where 1.15 billion people have access to telephones, mobile telephones, at a rate that every parent of teenagers would have killed for in Australia. The access to the internet is broad, and I don't think it's any surprise that across India, the sector that even during this crisis has continued to boom has been that technology sector, in part because, as we all know, the technology sectors evolved around and before regulations came out, and I think that's an area that we can attract. The other area that I know there's strong interest in is the scientific links between India and Australia continue to grow, and we have researchers working with the institute in Hyderabad on a vaccine related to COVID. There's desire for that to continue. So I think our university sectors and the skills of researchers, those medical researchers who I know work for relatively small sums these days on the cause of humanity, and who should be cherished and are certainly being cherished during this period. That's another area where we should be focusing.
Fantastic. Panelists, who's got a question for Barry?
Yeah, Victor, Steve here. I'd like to ask Barry, as High Commissioner, I think you or the Prime Minister launched the new Australian store at Amazon India, which I think is a wonderful initiative because, 670 million Indians have the internet. And of those, 130 million are actually already doing online shopping. So I just wanted, can you update us on how that is going? And do you see that as really creating a new pathway of market entry into India?
Well, as we know, technology's come a long way during the COVID crisis. All the technologies we're now using have always been on the shelf, but we've never used them to the same extent. I know Anand Mahindra, the founder and chairman of Mahindra Industries here, said a month or so ago that there are two crises affecting the world. There was the coronavirus, and then there was the webinar virus. So I think that's right. But e-commerce has gone off here because we had a significant lockdown from late March until early May. E-commerce stores were continuing to operate, to deliver. It was the way in which we got food and into the embassy compound and the like. So it has taken off even more. I did have, before lockdown, the opportunity with Simon Birmingham to initiate that portal on Amazon India. I understand as of this morning there are more than 30 Australian products there, ranging from San Remo pasta, Capilano honey, which is the premium honey being sold across India, and I buy A2 milk most Saturdays. I have A2 milk delivered most Saturdays from that portal. So it's going well, and I think Austrade, many businesses in Australia that have products to sell are trying to work out how to do it using e-platforms. And of course, Capilano's been here a long time, San Remo's been here a long time, A2 milk has been here more recently. All of them launched themselves, as you would expect, with marketing campaigns, and I think that's the key. Sometimes we think that e-platforms are a cheap way of selling goods, and they can be, but it still requires knowledge across the market and to be introduced to the market. That's the good thing. But no, e-commerce, India is the place for e-commerce. You can buy just about everything.
So Pratibha, you've been to Australia several times. As you talked about with Barry, you've welcomed so many Australian experiences. What do you see as the opportunities, and what's your optimism for increased cultural interplay? So many Australians go to India for spirituality and retreat, and also just the love of architecture and culture. What do you see as the opportunities?
Thank you, Victor. High Commissioner, I just wanted to, before I come to culture, I would like your thoughts on the new education policy, which has come out last week. And you know that there's a disenchantment that Indians have with the United States because of the flip-flop in the visa policies, not just for students, but also for young professionals who are working there. The H-1B, H-1 whatever visas, that there was a little up and down, and disenchantment with confusion about the visas, whether students who have finished their degrees can stay back and work there, whether they have to come back, or whether these young professionals who are working there can remain there for for a long time, or their spouses could join them or not. So there was all this kind of a confusion around, and I do remember that Infosys got back a lot of their employees from the United States. They in fact flew them back because their visas had expired, and the United States had refused to extend the visas. So my question to you is, in these times, do you think there's an opportunity for Australia, for Indian students to go to Australia to study? Almost about 2 million students go every year to the United States to study in those universities. So how is Australia reacting to this, to what is happening with India and the United States vis-a-vis the visas for students and for young professionals? And is Australia going to step up and, come in and try to attract more Indian students to Australia? Also, will the students who study in Australia be allowed to work there for a longer time? Do you think there will be a policy change after your Prime Minister, his very pro-India kind of a stance that he has taken? So I'd like your thoughts on the, and what do you think about our own change in our education policy?
Well, ultimately, national education policy is a matter for the government of that country. And I've read a summary of the new national education policy in India, and it seems to me to tick all the boxes that, as a former Chief Minister or Premier of New South Wales, appeal to me in terms of literacy, numeracy, but also those other skills that we expect of our young people and our young workers of today's times. When you appreciate that 1 million Indians turn 18 each month, you understand the size of the Indian nation and the challenges that it faces. Can I come back to the Australian part though? So up until a few weeks ago, Victor, and you will recall that I mastered well when I was in New South Wales politics, but I was born in Melbourne many years ago, last century in fact. And up until a few weeks ago, I was making 3 points about Australia and university education. Firstly, that it was a safe place to study. And that will be the same again. We will get through this, but it was much easier to argue a few weeks ago. Secondly, that in terms of proximity, it's only 12 hours by direct flight to the east coast of Australia. So, in terms of proximity, it was good. And the third one I always mentioned, and Pratibha, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that India is a price point market. And I would make the point that compared to those Ivy League universities in North America or those antiquated establishments in the UK, we offered a cheaper product. But beyond that, I would always start with the fact that, in my view, and as seen by the university rankings, but for whatever reason, underplayed in my experience in universities marketing themselves overseas, we also have world-class universities. So there were 4 reasons why Indians would want to come to Australia. And the good news is that prior to COVID, there was strong growth. Clearly, India has an international flight ban. Australia's flight restrictions have been reimposed via caps. There's little in the way of airline traffic between both countries. At the moment, it's just the Air India repatriation flights occasionally and a couple of charters occasionally. Qantas has shut down its international operations. Virgin has never flown to Australia. And so the challenge we have is how to get the students back. So the federal and state governments were considering at the present time doing a couple of pilots to trial ways to get people safely into the country. So in other words, having a health check on the way out of where you're leaving, whichever country it is, flying in, doing quarantine, presumably conducted with the support of universities, and then being able to go into universities. And this all assumed that next year we would have face-to-face teaching resuming in our universities. All of that's in a state of flux because of what's happening in Australia. But in the meantime, the government's announced a number of matters relating to visas. So visas for people wanting to come to study in Australia can now be submitted. That hadn't been happening whilst COVID was on because of there was no need, we couldn't get you there, but there is still an expectation or a hope that we'll have our universities open for the start of next year. Secondly, some changes were made to the post-study rights attached to visas so that those ongoing students or those enrolled students who are back here in India or in Australia being forced to study online, that will count towards their study rights at the end of their graduation in Australia. So we've sought to try and address those matters, not just because of the competition that we have from North America and the UK, but because we think it's the right thing to do. We recognise as an Australian government, for which I speak as a High Commissioner, that Indian students coming to Australia are a significant contributor to our economy. They're a significant contributor to the jobs for Australians. And of course, they're a significant contributor to the ongoing relationship that our two countries have, both at all levels of society.
And without stereotyping Indians, if we look at the Australian school system, Indian migrant kids are high performers in the school system. So
I think, can I tell you, Victor, that I think that if you look at the multicultural connections of Australia, I think that recent migrants to Australia probably better understand than some of us who have lived there for generations how much education is the keys to the kingdom. And I think what I found as a local member, and I'm sure you found too, was that the ethnic communities in each of our suburbs took education very seriously. And maybe that's a pessimistic reflection on Australians of many generations. But I think, you know, Indian students in Australia, Chinese students in Australia, students from Bhutan, Nepal, and other countries certainly value that education.
Well, as you know, the migrant is typically 20 or 30% higher in optimism and belief than native born. Now, Stephen's been working in a hospital in Ayurvedic medicine and Western medicine. He's been back in Australia for 6 months after spending 13 years in India. Stephen, what do you see? What do you want to ask the High Commissioner?
Well, having lived in India for 13 years, as you said, Victor, you can't help but be changed. And I felt my way of seeing the world has changed significantly. And I'm just interested, how has living in India changed your perspective? I was just hearing a few things of what you've noticed. In particular, is there anything else that you really feel has influenced you just being in India?
So I've had 11 or 12 years coming to India, normally on 5-day business trips, the old political trips. You'd leave on a weekend, you'd arrive back the following weekend, and you know, you'd be rushed through so many functions, you'd forget who was the director of the Aboriginal Art Gallery who put on the function for you. But I've remembered now, I'll never again forget it. So this is the longest I've spent in India, and I had hoped, Stephen, that I might have got to see more of the place, but of course I arrived in late February. A few weeks later, we went into lockdown. So that part of India has been locked off from me. But what is clear to me, even as a consumer of you know, the many newspapers of India, is what I always knew to be the corporate responsibility of significant Indian citizens. You know, where a family in a southern state provides an ambulance service to a major city as part of their corporate responsibility, extends right down the line. And I have to say, Pratibha, being in Delhi, observing closely Delhi events, because I live in this city, so I follow the disease here more closely. I've been amazed at the humanity shown by individual Indians. So that ingrained responsibility to others has impressed me mightily. So, Stephen, it's probably not as diverse or as extensive as you'd like. I look forward one day to going to Rishikesh. Before I do so, I want to do some beginner yoga classes, but I don't want to do them virtually because I know I'm going to need someone to show me what I'm doing. But I hope to see more of the country, and I have no doubt that I will continue to be surprised. And of course, you know, you've only got to arrive to know how much more relaxed in a sense it is. It starts a bit slower in the day, it goes a bit later at night. But then when you're working with Indian bureaucrats in the lead up to a prime ministerial virtual summit, you realise how hard people work and how strongly they battle for each side. So, so I've seen a bit of it, but look, you know, I've been here 5 seconds, locked down into this embassy for 4 of those seconds. So I'm not going to become, you know, remember the old celebrities that came to Australia, got off the plane for the first time, and the media would say, "What do you think of Australia?" I'm not going to do that.
Barry, I interviewed some women digging ditches in a rural village and asked them what made them optimistic. And just this, you know, in a sari digging ditches, and you ask them what makes them optimistic, you get this effervescent smile. And it's, you know, either God or family or a mixture of both. And the joy you get on the streets, you will love that. Now, AK is probably one of our most experienced operators in promoting Australian commercial interests in India. Did you want to reflect on something and ask the High Commissioner something, AK?
Yeah, thank you, Victor. Hello, High Commissioner. You've been here for 6 months and we haven't had a chance to meet. So I guess that's a reflection of today's realities. And hopefully we'll get to see you in Chennai soon. I'm based in Chennai. So hopefully we'll get to see you here soon. But I have met you.
You have my colleague, the Consul General Susan Grace, to look after you. So the Empress of the South, as I call her.
Yes, absolutely, the Queen. Well, but I have met you in your visits during your previous visits at the New South Wales Premier, and also you were gracious enough to host me when I came as a speaker at the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. I think it was 2013, I think it was. So I think, High Commissioner, for someone who's been operating in this space of Australia-India trade for nearly 25 years now, I was Australia's first trade commissioner in South India in '95. I think we're facing some of the most exciting times in terms of the relationship between Australia and India. Though Australia has made many attempts and many pushes like the Australian New Horizon, the Utsavs, and all those sort of stuff. But I think today, given the circumstances back in Australia, which is, we're going through probably the first recession in the last nearly 3 decades, and we have issues with China, and obviously there's an increased focus on India, increased bilateral relationship with India, because we need to develop India. And as we know, $30 billion in the investment that we have really don't speak for the true potential that exists between Australia and India. And given, I'm also saying it's exciting and optimistic because this is the time I think leadership plays a very key role to really realize the opportunities or potential that exists in the relationship. And I'm so personally delighted that you're here, somebody of your sort of caliber who's very passionate about India. I can tell you very frankly that I've met many premiers in my last 2.5 decades, but there are very few who are really genuinely passionate about India. And I'm glad that you're one of them and you come to live with us here. So my, I guess, question to High Commissioner is that where do you see the opportunity in terms of realizing the true potential now that we are so closely engaged at a personal level between our prime ministers, the foreign ministers, and we have a comprehensive strategic agreement at the defense, politics, across all levels. I think it can't get better than this. But how do we really capitalize on this to exploit the true potential that exists in this relationship?
Well, thanks, AK. Firstly, I'd say that former Labor Premier Mike Rann, who overlaps slightly with me as Premier, had a great passion for India and had great contacts in India. And in fact, I spoke to him before I came to India. And if the Labor government that appointed him High Commissioner to London had been sensible, they would have appointed him to be the first politician, former Premier, to come to India because he knew the country backwards. So I'm not the only Premier who's been passionate about this this piece.
I worked for 8 years, High Commissioner, so I can truly.
The second thing I'd say is that there are lots of areas, and of course we need people to focus on different areas. And the sectors set out in Peter Varghese report, the 10 sectors there still remain relevant, and that ranges all the way from agriculture through to critical minerals. And so in critical minerals, India has an ambition to have a world-class electric vehicle industry, which will of course require world-class electric battery industry as well. Australia offers the closest and most economic source of lithium outside of China, which seems to have cornered most of the market in the world in terms of lithium resource. And there's a number of reasons why India may prefer to buy its lithium from Australia, but that's just one example of how we have elements that can assist India achieve its own economic goals. Equally, India is improving, and economic reforms in the agricultural sector will see this happen even more. It's farming practices. So farmers in India, it's been announced, will be able to sell to who they like. Will be able to sell to companies directly and not have to operate through mandis or the markets. So it's a bit like the old wool and wheat debates we had in Australia a couple of generations ago, maybe not that long ago, but a generation ago. And that will ensure that the agricultural sector increasingly becomes open to investment. And I think that's a good thing. But of course, India is still we sell storage technology to India. We sell mining technology to India, but we also have a capacity to sell grain. India has become a large consumer of beer. It's got a growth framework that pub owners in Australia can only dream about, and it needs quality barley, because whilst they grow barley here, they need malt barley. But if they're going to be brewing under license beers from around the world, there are standards required, and that's another opportunity for Australia. So I think there are many. The challenge currently, I think we're all battling with, is how do you do it virtually? Because there will not be trade missions in the short term, and but we will find a way through. And I had a discussion with Austrade's team this morning and my team across India, and targeted web events, not mass events, but targeted groups connecting businesses in Australia, maybe initially with government spruikers here, state and federal, and then ultimately with some of the businesses themselves. Is one of the ways we're now about to explore.
I think, for instance, the water sector, Barry, I just look at what Prime Minister Modi is doing in cleaning up the Ganga, and of course, water shortages. Australia has a real advantage on that front. I just wanted to ask each of the...
Victor, just on that, Victor, I just thought you were about to do an advertisement for Rubicon Water, a Melbourne company, a Victorian company that out of the Sunraysia, I think, which is doing some great work in southern India, improving the technology and the canals and the monitoring of irrigation water. And I think I'll not have to remind anybody of Rubicon in a couple of years, because they'll be not only big continually in Victoria, but they'll be big in India.
And they're big in California and Colorado as well. No, I know Rubicon well. But we've got a question for each of so you, Barry, AK and Pratibha, but also Steve and Steve. Sam Jules says, look, how are the Indian people remaining optimistic? So Australia, of course, is a very secular society, and religion plays a very small role in Australia. To what extent is the optimism of the Indian people based in their spirituality, is the question from Sam Jewell. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll have a go on that, Victor, if I may. I've seen this among corporate leaders, particularly in the South, but also in Mumbai. And although it probably has its origins in spirituality, the thing that I've seen that makes them so balanced and so positive is, in one word, acceptance. Acceptance. They firmly live the principle that if I've given something my best shot, I just accept whatever the outcome is. And I think that's, I'd love to have that, because I think that's a great recipe for stability.
Well, Pratibha, you're well known for your leadership in spiritual dance. What do you see?
Well, Victor, as you said, I have lived a life in culture, in dance, in the spiritual space, because I believe that Indian classical dance, unlike most other art forms around the world, has very deep roots in spirituality and culture. And when we approach the stage, we worship the stage, and we ask the forgiveness of Mother Earth for stamping on her, because we consider Earth as our mother. And we say, thank you for holding us up so that we're able to be stable when we dance. I mean, that's the approach towards the dance form itself. So I think everything in India, our way of life is deeply rooted in our spiritual, understanding of what life is about. And as Stephen just said, the Bhagavad Gita that we follow, I mean, most Indians follow, says that, you have to act out of the best intentions. You have to act in the present. Don't think about the past or the future. Act in the present, be in the moment, be full in the moment. We say Purna, be full, be complete, be whole in the moment, and act with your mind, your body, and your soul intact, in unison and in alignment. Now, what has happened around the world is that your body, your mind, and your soul is not in alignment. And therefore you see, the disconnect between the body, mind, and the soul. So most Indians who are, like what you would consider middle class Indians or low income group Indians, people who do not have much by way of material, things that we understand as pointers to success, have this belief that they are living a very fulfilled life because their life has a meaning, their life has a purpose, and they are happy within themselves in their connection to another reality, which is, which is in the realm of spirituality. You said that Australia is secular, and I think that India is very, very secular too, because, in our secularity, I mean, lies our strength, because we believe that each of us has the right. Forget the legal rights. I mean, we're not referring to legal rights, but has the ability to follow our respective religions without conflict with anybody else. Now, the conflict comes in the political space, but not really in the in the societal space that we live in. So I think that it's that India, shows a way forward to the world as how to live as individuals with a purpose, with a commitment, with very little in terms of material holdings or material gains or material acquisitions, that are generally considered pointers to success, because success or happiness is not derived from what you own or what you have gained by virtue of your fame or your job or your the emoluments you get through your job or the kind of lifestyle you lead, but your own happiness is internal to you. And therefore we talk about yoga, therefore we talk about spirituality in everything, and we say begin your day worshipping the sun god for having risen, because if the sun doesn't rise, then you don't wake up and your world is not, your day cannot function as normally as it should. So we worship every element, we worship everything around us. And like I told you, I mean, there was a disconnect with the younger generation about this way of life, and the pandemic has given reason for people to step back, pause, and understand what is truly meaningful in life. And I think that what is truly meaningful is to have an internal connection. Your spiritual connection, what you say, is an internal connection of your mind, body, and soul in alignment, yoked, as you say, yoga is yoked to a higher reality. And I think that in these times, India has shown the world how to deal with equanimity, even though you have very little and very less in terms of material benefits.
Beautiful. So, Stephen, you've just lived 13 years in what is a spiritual hospital run by the Brahma Kumaris. So, Rod Wade, who's online from San Diego, so it's very early in the morning for him, says he's interested about those 13 years of yours, working in the hospital, working in the spiritual environment. So what did you learn from that?
Yeah, thanks. Great question, Rod. A little bit like Barry, when I first started going to India in 1997, I was coming in and coming out as, I guess, a spiritual tourist. And so, but then when I started to live there from 2006, it's a completely different experience and I think that goes for any culture where you completely immerse yourself. But there's a lot of things that I've learned, and I don't know in which order to mention it, so it's not in an order of priority, but I think as a result of my interactions with people is that I now value my family much better than I did when I went there. That's not just about distance, but it's seeing how much the family is valued in India in terms of how people look after each other. And the examples that you've given in Delhi of people from other parts of the country looking after people in other parts of the country. So I think I got a greater sense of the family. I also got a greater sense of work ethic. You know, in Australia, we're thinking about retiring at 60 and 65, and now I'm not thinking about retirement. And in India, you know, my boss was a director and a doctor, and he was 70 years of age. We had another hospital. The director of that was 80 years of age, and he was still operating 12 hours a day. So I was exposed to these septuagenarians, octogenarians that were just impressive in their ability to just keep going and serve others. So I learned a lot about work ethic. And I think the other thing, there's quite a lot, but is simplicity. And gratitude. I would walk outside of my house at the end of the street. There was a blacksmith's family that was living under a black plastic tarpaulin, and through the middle of winter and all through the rains. And I had just come from my nice little hot shower where I had somebody cleaning my room every day and ironing my clothes and all of that help. And I'd walk out and see that, and that would make me so grateful. And sometimes I think I just wish that every single Australian had an opportunity to spend a couple of months in India. They would really be transformed in terms of how they see the world and much more grateful for what we have. You know, after spending 2 months in Mumbai in December and January this year and having to take an hour and a half to get 6 kilometres, I will never complain about a traffic jam in Australia again.
That's brilliant. Look, the conversation has flowed so beautifully, but we are coming towards the end of time. So what I'd like to do is ask AK again to reflect on spirituality, and then Barry, for you to round it off. You've promised you're going to take up yoga, so you're going to take up the deepest part of breathing and life force and the like. So AK, do you want to just reflect again on that difference between Australia and India and the extent, you know, Stephen rightly pointed out, and Pratibha, it's not just spirituality, it's that deep love of family and commitment to community.
Absolutely, Victor. I think I just want to go back to the earlier question one of our audience asked. If I remember, the framing was Australia is secular and India is religious. I think I just want to sort of make a comment on that, saying that India is secular and religious both. And it's a wonderful example of both of them can coexist and very peacefully, and we've shown that for centuries. And again, talking about spirituality, the Indian spirituality encompasses the entire nature. Today we're talking about the climate change and all the stuff related to changing weather patterns, stuff like that. Indians have always respected nature, like Pratibha said. They pray, they pray trees, plants, animals, nature, so that the thinking is that unless the system that sustains us is stable, we will not be stable. So I think that respect for the environment has been ingrained in Indians, and religion is very much a very, very strong part of every Indian, no matter what religion you practice. I think it's very strongly taught from a very early age, it's imbibed. And it's necessarily a good thing, as long as people don't say that other religion is bad. Everybody should feel that they're proud of what they do. And yeah, I think it's a wonderful experience to live in India. And I also agree with Stephen. I think Australians should have an option to come and live in India for a short while, so that I'm sure they'll stop complaining about a lot of stuff back in Australia.
Okay, my mother is a yogi who only retired from teaching at Christmas at the age of 92. But God sent us to Chennai so we could go to Pondicherry and to Oroville. And so I'm infatuated as well. So look, we're coming up to the 55-minute mark. So Barry, if you'd round it off with everything that's coming forward from you. I know Pratibha said we must live in the present, but you're also a man of the future. And then what we'll do is, there's a number of questions on the Q&A and there's lots of interesting people on board. So then I'll bring everyone in for sort of a wider chit chat. Chairman Rob Masters apologises, Barry. He doesn't have a good internet connection in Berwick in Melbourne. So we'd love you to round off the event and to inspire us at the end.
Victor, firstly, thanks for the opportunity to participate. Secondly, I mentioned earlier that I think that one of the things that's contributed to the relationship getting closer is our shared values. And I think the citizens of India, share our values around democracy, about multi-faith, around rule of law. But I think they also share a couple of other features. And, this is why I think that, all countries that have experienced lockdowns had challenges, but they're big challenges in democracies. And there's no bigger democracy than India. And I often joke here that Indians, like Australians, when asked to do something by government, aren't always the first to say yes. They're often the first to say why. Overwhelmingly obedient, but we always question these things. I think it's probably the Irish tradition in Australian society. I'm not quite sure where it came from in the Indian tradition, but I think we have shared personal traits as well, and I think it is that we are happy to debate. We are happy to engage vigorously in democracy. We are happy to embrace education, and above all, we're industrious. And I think for me, that makes me feel good about the task that I have here on behalf of Australia to try and further strengthen the relationship, because whether it's in Pratibha's area of the arts, whether it's in hard industry as AK and others have dealt with, or whether it's in areas of traditional or non-traditional medicine, there are many opportunities here that I think properly developed, finally secured, if you like, can have a lasting influence on both our countries. But I tend to agree with a comment AK made at the end there, which is lots of Indians migrate to Australia. There are a few that come back to India here. I've met a few people who've come back here to retire. I just think there's a lot to be learned in this country, including the pace of life and that dharma, that karma that people talk about. And Victor, can I just say at the end, I'm not looking for spiritual enlightenment in yoga. I'm just looking for fewer aches and pains when I get out of bed of a morning.
Well, you look so fit and healthy, and we love you. We really love you, Barry. So,
thanks, Victor.
On behalf of the Centre for Optimism, can I thank you, Barry, for making the time, Pratibha, AK, Steve and Stephen, and everyone who's joined us as attendees. We're going to go into a sort of a more general chit-chat now, and I think there's, Barry, if you'll come back to us at some point, I think there's an appetite. And
happy to come back, but I have to go now because otherwise I'll be late for my next virtual integration.
Exactly. So we are so grateful for your time. It's been wonderful. So we formally conclude. The video will stop and we'll be able to do. So Pratibha, lead us in the final greeting.
Thank you so much.
Go well.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
I think this is, I joke here that the Namaste or Namaskar is India's revenge on the British Raj, because you now have the future King of England going around not shaking hands as the Brits do, but namaskaring. It's wonderful. It's karma.
Not just the future King of England, but everybody. I mean, all over the world, even President Trump, who I started doing namaskar.
It's important the British play puja. That's right. See you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that effervescent Centre for Optimism, Optimism Cafe on India and Australia, optimism and opportunity. And we'd love you to get involved with the Centre for Optimism. Come to our website, have a browse through, join up as a member, sign up for a subscription, or just sign up for one of our newsletter subscriptions and see how you like it. Have a great day and go with optimism.